John Denver was more than just a talk show host. He was the best at staying up late. People quickly fell in love with Johnny Carson after the first episode of The Tonight Show with Carson aired in October 1962. A lot of people watched every night to see him make fun of, tease, and sometimes even push his guests in ways that made late-night TV magic. Carson thought it was time to leave the air after 30 years of history-making shows. It was 1992, and his last show was over. Fans thought they would see him everywhere. There will be honors, interviews, and maybe even a few surprise guests. He just disappeared instead. No press trips or guest spots on talk shows, just silence. What did really happen? Why did the man who could make a whole country laugh, cry, or fume decide to hide so completely? What was Johnny Carson's life like after the crowd stopped cheering? Keep reading because we're going to talk about the untold story of Johnny Carson, which includes the real reason for his quiet retirement and the mysterious last years of TV's most famous show. John Candy wasn't born famous, but he sure made it. Carson was just an interesting kid from Corning, Iowa, who loved making people laugh before the cameras, the laughs, and the fame. John Carson was born on October 23, 1925, to Ruth and Homer Carson. He grew up in a small town that had no idea it was raising the coming late-night king. He was the middle child, with an older sister and a younger brother named Richard, who would go on to become a TV director. Living changed for the Carson family as they moved from Aoka to Clarinda and then to Red Oak. When Johnny was 8, they finally settled down in Norfolk, Nebraska. That's the exact spot where the magic started. One afternoon, he was at a friend's house and found a book on magic. That was the start of a lasting obsession. He got a magician's kit in the mail, practiced all the time, and soon became the family's favorite performer. He would stick close to his parents and siblings and grunt, "Pick a card, any card," over and over again until someone gave in. He was hooked by age 12. His mom even made him a cape. And at age 14, he made his name as the Great Carson, who was playing for the Kiwanis Club in his area. It costs $3 a show. It wasn't about the money for Johnny, though. The crowd laughed, clapped, or gasped at that tense moment. He was still after the same high that would make him famous on TV. That need to be free drove him west after high school. He hitched a ride to Hollywood because he wanted to be famous and more so because he felt like it. That trip didn't really end on a red carpet, though. Johnny got a $50 fine for pretending to be a midshipman, which is a story that has almost become a tale. So it fit the pattern, even if it didn't happen. Carson was good at making trouble into a story that was worth telling even before he became famous. The war then happened. Carson became an officer in the U.S. Navy in June 1943 through the V-12 school at Columbia University's Millsaps College. Even though he was just made an ensign, the war was almost over. His job was to serve on the USS Pennsylvania in the Pacific. As a communications officer, reading texts that have been encrypted. He learned to box in between jobs. He was good, which was a surprise. On the same ship, they have 15 wins, 0 losses, and 1 tie. The most important thing in his Navy years wasn't a fight, though. It was a trick. To be exact, a magic trick. Carson told James Forrestal, who was Secretary of the Navy at the time, that he didn't plan to stay in the Navy after the war. Johnny said he wanted to be a wizard when Forrestal asked him what he really wanted to do. Forrestal told him to show that it was true. And Johnny did just that. He pulled off a card trick that made one of the most important men in the country laugh out loud. That was it for Carson. He knew then that he could charm anyone, even someone important enough to run the Navy. Johnny didn't waste time when the war was over. He went to the University of Nebraska with the help of the Navy's education perks. He joined the Chi Omega Club there and kept up his magic shows. This time, he was getting $25 per show, which was a big raise from when he worked for the Great Carson. He originally chose to major in writing because he thought he would write comedy instead of performing it. But the stage called to him, and within a few months, he changed his attention to talk shows and plays. Everything changed because of that choice. Carson taped a project called How to Write Comedy for Radio as his senior thesis. This was something that no one had ever done before. There wasn't a lot of dry theory in the article. It looked like a show. Johnny took jokes and skits from popular radio shows and explained why they worked in his own unique way. He did this by breaking down timing, rhythm, and delivery like a true student of laughs. Because his thesis was so special, he was able to finish in just 3 years. It was clear that he wasn't following the normal road, even when he was a student. From 1947 to 1949, Johnny Carson studied radio and speech and added physics as a minor. He also wanted to be in the spotlight more and more. He had done his job well, served his country, and learned what made people laugh. The base was put down. However, he had no idea that it would lead to 30 years of TV history. How Carson became the best late-night host. Johnny Carson didn't just show up on TV one day. He got more popular with each joke until people in America couldn't get enough of him. But he was just a young man in Nebraska trying to make it in a new field called television long before he became the host of The Tonight Show. It all began for him in 1950 at WOW Radio and TV in Omaha, where he aired a strange morning show called The Squirrel's Nest. It was typical early Carson, smart, unexpected, and a little naughty. One of his funniest acts was talking to pigeons on the roof of the building, where they would tell him about all the bad government they had seen. He would become known for that cheeky, smart, and just barely off-center sense of humor. Carson would host neighborhood events and church dinners to make money when the cameras were off. He would sometimes be in the same room as the politicians he had just criticized on radio. That mix of bravery and charm got the attention of the right people. One of those people's wives worked in radio in Los Angeles through family ties, which helped Carson make a link. He soon left for California, ready for something bigger. Carson had hosted his own sketch comedy show called Carson Cellar on KNXT in Los Angeles by 1951. It was weird, low budget, and very much in his way. Red Skelton, a famous comic book character, saw it right away. Red Skelton hired Carson as a writer for his show because he thought Carson was great. After that, Skelton passed out during a practice one fateful night, and Carson had to fill in. He got it right. People in the crowd loved him. America saw that Johnny Carson was more than just a writer that one night. He was a star in the making. Well-known people began to notice. In 1955, funny man Jack Benny asked Carson to be on his show. Carson copied Benny's style, slow timing, and facial movements for fun. Benny didn't get mad, though. He told him he would do well. He was right. Carson hosted a number of shows over the next few years, such as game shows, talk shows, and entertainment shows. Even though not all of them worked out, he gained experience, which was much more valuable. In 1957, he got a new job with ABC on the show Who Do You Trust? He could finally be himself on a daily game show. He could think of jokes on the spot and talk to the contestants. And that joke made people laugh out loud. People in the U.S. saw the real Johnny Carson for the first time. People really liked the show. And Carson wasn't the only one who did well. He also met Ed McMahon, who would become his right-hand man. They got along right away and had the kind of comedic spark that would make The Tonight Show famous years later. NBC was looking for someone to take over The Tonight Show in the early 1960s. Steve Allen and Jack Paar had been the first hosts of this late-night show. Carson wasn't sure if he was up for host 105 minutes of live TV every night. It was a big job. He turned down the first offer from NBC. But he finally agreed after a lot of persuasion and because his deal at ABC was coming to an end. The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson started on October 1, 1962. It was rough the first year. Carson had a hard time getting into a flow, and the pressure was huge. But he couldn't be stopped once he got inside. America fell in love with Johnny again, not with a figure or a trick, but with him. People loved watching him on TV because of how charming he was and how easily he dealt with both guests and awkward situations. There was also that voice that started every show. People all over the country laughed out loud when Ed McMahon said, "Here's Johnny." Then there was the monologue, the golf swing, the sketches, the interviews, and the monologue. People watched the show every night as a way to relax and laugh at the end of the day. Behind the scenes, The Tonight Show was always changing. By 1972, the show had moved from New York to Burbank, California, which was closer to Hollywood and the famous people who sat on Carson's couch. Johnny changed how much he had to do as his fame grew. He hosted fewer nights a week, but he kept the magic alive. When he had to take time off, guest hosts like Joan Rivers and later Jay Leno came in, but no one could really take his place. Carson was the best-paid man on TV by the middle of the 1970s. He made millions of dollars every year, not just for hosting, but also for the brand he had created. When he got to Hollywood, they offered him movie jobs, such as in The Thomas Crown Affair and Blazing Saddles. All of them were turned down. Carson knew that he should have been behind that desk instead of in front of the camera. John Carson made people laugh, think, and sometimes even cry for 30 years. He shaped an age, not just a show. Carson made a name for himself that few others have been able to match, from his early pigeon talks in Omaha to his famous nights in Burbank. He wasn't just He was late-night TV as the host of The Tonight Show. There were 4 people that Johnny Carson loved and lost. Carson could make everyone in the country laugh every night. His love life wasn't nearly as easy, though. The man who seemed to have everything, fame, money, and good looks, had a hard time making his marriage work. He tried 4 times. 4 times, it broke my heart. Johnny's first love story began when he married Joan Jody Morrill Walcott in 1949. They met when they were both in college at the University of Nebraska. Johnny was new to radio and Jod was in the Club Phi Beta Phi. Carson got his first job in television that same year, and soon after, he and his wife had 3 boys: Christopher, Richard, and Corey. The early years looked bright. They moved all over the country while Johnny looked for better jobs. As a writer for Red Skelton in Los Angeles and as a host of game shows in New York. But there was a price to pay for success. Jod once admitted that Johnny's job always came first, saying that he felt the same way.